Fergus Hume. Chapter 11. Princess Karacsay. Even as he spoke, the room was flooded with the light of the electric lamps. The woman by the window turned and came forward smiling. With a feeling of bitter disappointment, Giles recoiled. It was not Anne. He had been deceived by a chance resemblance. "I can quite understand your mistake," said the Princess Karacsay. "It is not the first time that I have been taken for my friend." Indeed, she was very like Anne, both in figure and face. She had the same dark hair and dark eyes, the same oval face and rich coloring. But her expression was different. She was more haughty than Miss Denham, and there was less simplicity in her manner. Even as Ware looked at her the likeness seemed to vanish, and he wondered that he should have made such a mistake. But for the twilight, the turn of her head, and her height, together with the way in which she carried herself, he would not have been deceived. "One would take you for Miss Denham's sister," he said when seated. The Princess smiled oddly. "We are alike in many ways," she replied quietly. "I look upon Miss Denham as my second self. You called me Anne when you mistook me for her," she added with a keen glance. "I have no right to do so, Princess, but—" He hesitated, not knowing how to choose his words. She saw his perplexity and smiled. "I quite understand, Mr. Ware. Miss Denham, has told you about me?" "I have not seen her for months, Mr. Ware, not since that terrible event which has made a fugitive of her." Giles was bitterly disappointed, and his face showed his feelings. From what Mrs. Cairns had said he was certain that the Princess would be able to help him, and here she confessed an ignorance of Anne's whereabouts. Nevertheless, Ware still hoped. He thought that, not knowing his real errand, she was feigning ignorance for the sake of her friend's safety. "I am sorry she has not spoken to you about me," he remarked, "for then you would know that I wish her well." "Oh, I know that. Anne, I may as well call her Anne to you, Mr. Ware, wrote to me from Rickwell several times. She told me all about you. But I have not seen her since the death of your fiancé. I have no idea where she is now. I thought, and Mrs. Cairns thought, that she would come to you in her distress, or at least communicate her whereabouts. She has done neither, and I do not know where to address a letter." "What is to be done?" said Giles, half to himself and much distressed. Princess Karacsay rose and glanced at the clock with a laugh. "Oh, if we talk, something may come of our putting our heads together," she said. "Meantime, we can make ourselves comfortable. Here are coffee and cigarettes, Mr. Ware. Would you prefer a cigar?" "No, thank you, Princess. These look very good." "Both coffee and cigarettes are Turkish," said she, handing him a cup and afterwards a cigarette. "I get them from a cousin of mine who is an attaché at Constantinople. Come now." She lighted a cigarette for herself and sat down on an amber divan near Ware's chair. "Let us talk before my friend arrives." "I beg your pardon, Princess. I hope my coming—" "No, no," she explained hurriedly. "I asked my friend to meet you." "Indeed?" Giles was much surprised. "I did not know we had a mutual friend." The Princess nodded and blew a cloud of smoke. "At 10 o'clock you shall see him. I won't tell you who he is. A little surprise, Mr. Ware." Ware looked at her sharply, but could make nothing of the enigmatic smile on her face. She was undeniably a very beautiful woman as she lounged amongst the amber-tinted cushions, but in her dress and general looks there was something barbaric. She wore a dinner dress of mingled scarlet and black, and many chains of sequins which jingled with her every movement. As Ware's eyes met her own she flashed a languorous look at him, and a slow smile wreathed her full red lips. Giles could not help admiring her, but he had a feeling that she was not altogether to be trusted. It behoved him to be wary in dealing with this superb tigress. Yet, as another thought crossed his mind, he smiled involuntarily. "Why do you smile, Mr. Ware?" asked the Princess. She spoke the English language admirably, and with but a little foreign accent. "Pardon," replied Giles, still smiling, "but Mrs. Cairns told me that at one time you aspired to become a governess. I can't imagine you teaching children." "Ah, you have no imagination. No Englishman has. Children are fond of me. Very fond." She cast another look at his handsome face, and added with emphasis, "I can make anyone I choose fond of me." "I quite believe it, Princess. You have a woman's imperial sceptre. Beauty." "A charming compliment," responded she, her mood changing. "But we are not here to exchange compliments. So you love Anne?" "With all my heart and soul," he replied fervently. His hostess appeared rather disconcerted by this reply. "You are a miracle of chivalry, my dear Mr. Ware," she said dryly. "But is it not rather a large heart you have to love two women at the same time?" "I understand what you mean," answered Ware quietly. "But my engagement to Miss Kent was purely a family arrangement. I loved Anne. I still love her. All the same, I would have married Miss Kent had she not been murdered." "You are very obedient, Mr. Ware." "And you very satirical, Princess. I could explain, but there is no need for me to do so. I want to find Anne. Can you help me?" "Not at present, but I may be able to do so. Of course, you don't believe that she killed your fiancé?" "Certainly not. I think the crime was committed by the man with whom she fled." "A tall man with a red beard and hair and black eyes?" "Yes, yes. Do you know him? Who is he?" "I have had him described to me," responded the Princess calmly, "but I know nothing about him." "Is he a friend of Anne's?" "That I don't know." She quietly selected another cigarette, lighted it, and looked with a serene smile at her visitor. Giles was annoyed. "We don't seem to be getting on with our business, Princess," he said roughly. "What is our business?" she demanded, looking at him through half closed eyes. Her scrutiny made Giles uncomfortable, and he shifted his seat as he answered. "Mrs. Cairns said you could tell me about Anne." "So I can. What do you want to know, Mr. Ware?" "Who is she? Who was her father? Is he dead or alive? What do you know about the Scarlet Cross, and—" He stopped, for the Princess had opened her eyes to their fullest extent. "The Scarlet Cross? You know about that also?" she asked. "Of course I do. There was an anonymous letter." "I have seen the letter, or at least a copy." "Indeed?" said Ware, much astonished. "And an enamelled cross?" "I have seen the cross also." "It appears to me, Princess, that you know everything about the case." She glanced again at the clock, and smiled as she replied, "I am a friend of Anne's, Mr. Ware. I dare say you would like to know who told me all these things. Well, you shall be enlightened at 10 o'clock. Meantime, I can tell you all I do know about Anne and her father." "You will speak freely?" he asked mistrustfully. "Absolutely. You—" she hesitated. "You love Anne?" She gave him a searching look. "Yes, I see you do. I can speak openly. Will you have another cup of coffee? No? Another cigarette? Ah, there is the box. A match? Now," said Giles eagerly, "what about Anne?" "What about myself, first of all, Mr. Ware? I am a Hungarian. I quarreled with my people and ran away. Finding myself stranded in London with very little money, I tried to get a post as a governess. I went to Mrs. Cairns, and thus became acquainted with Anne. We became great friends. She told me everything about herself. When I knew her history we became greater friends than ever. I was a governess only for a year. Then someone heard me sing, and—" She shrugged her beautiful shoulders. "But that is quite another story, Mr. Ware. I am a concert singer now, and it pays me excellently." "I am very pleased with your success, Princess. But Anne—" She flashed a rather annoyed look at him. "You are scarcely so chivalrous as I thought, Mr. Ware," she said coldly. "No, say nothing. I quite understand. Let us talk of Anne. I will tell you her history." She relighted her cigarette, which had gone out, and continued. "Her father was a gambler and a wanderer. He lived mostly on the Continent. Monte Carlo for choice. Anne's mother—" Here the Princess paused, and then went on with an obvious effort. "I know nothing of Anne's mother, Mr. Ware. She died when Anne was a child. Mr. Denham brought up his daughter in a haphazard way." "Was his name really Denham?" "So Anne told me. I had no reason to think that it was otherwise. He was a gentleman of good family, but an outcast from his people for reason of his reckless folly. I also am an outcast," said she pleasantly, "but merely because I am strong-minded. I am not foolish." "No, Princess," said Giles, looking keenly at her. "I should certainly not call you foolish." "But I can be foolish on occasions," said she quickly, and flushed as she glanced at him. "Like all women." "But Anne. I see we must get back to Anne. Well, she, having better moral principles than her father, grew wearied of their wandering life. She decided to become a governess. Mr. Denham put her to school at Hampstead. A sister of Mrs. Cairns keeps the school, and that is why Anne is so intimate with Mrs. Cairns. And when her education was finished, she took a situation in Italy. There she remained some years. Afterwards she rejoined her father for a time. He died at Florence, typhoid fever, I believe, and Anne found herself alone. She returned to England, and, assisted by Mrs. Cairns, took various situations. She always returned to Mrs. Cairns when out of an engagement. It was on one of these occasions that I met her. We have been friends for a long time, Mr. Ware. Then Anne was engaged by Mrs. Morley, and the rest you know. There is no more to be said." "Is that all?" said Giles, disappointed by this bald narrative. The Princess shrugged her shoulders, and, throwing aside her cigarette, leaned back with her hands behind her head. "What would you, Mr. Ware? Anne is a good woman. Good women never have any history." "Can you tell me anything about the Scarlet Cross?" "Anne never spoke of such a thing to me. But my friend may be able to tell you. Ah!" The Princess raised her head as a ring came to the door. "There is my friend. Before his time, too. But we have finished our conversation, Mr. Ware." "For the present, yes." She looked at him suddenly. "But certainly," she said in her vivacious way, "you must come and see me again. We will have much to talk of. You love music. I will sing to you. And—" Here she broke off to greet a newcomer, much to the relief of Giles, who was beginning to feel uncomfortable. "How do you do, Mr. Steele?" With an exclamation Ware rose. It was indeed Steele who stood before him, looking as round and rosy and cheerful as ever. "You are surprised to see me, sir," he said with a twinkle. "I am very much surprised. I went to see you yesterday." "And found that I was out of town? So I was. So I am supposed to be. But the telegram of the Princess here told me that she expected you this evening. So I left my country business and came up." "You see," said the Princess, sitting down again amongst her cushions. "You see, Mr. Ware, I told you we had a mutual friend. Now you know how I am so well acquainted with the case." And she laughed. "The Princess," explained Steele, seeing Giles' astonishment, "read all about the case." Being a friend of Miss Denham's, and seeing that I had charge of the matter, she sent for me. We have talked over the case, and I have received much assistance from from this very clever lady, the Princess Karacsay." And Steele bowed. "But," stammered Ware, still puzzled, "you believe Miss Denham to be guilty. Surely the Princess will not—" "No, no," came from the divan in the deep-toned voice of the woman. "Anne is my friend. I would not help him to arrest her." "The fact is," said Steele easily, "I have changed my opinion, Mr. Ware, and I think Miss Denham is innocent. The man who killed Miss Kent is called Wilson." "Wilson? And who is Wilson? And why did he kill her?" "I don't know who Wilson is," replied Steele. "I am trying to find out. I am not quite certain why he killed her, but I am beginning to suspect that it was on account of this inherited money. I told you that, Princess," he added, turning to the divan. "Yes, Mr. Steele. And I said then, I say now, I do not agree." "If you would be more explicit," said Ware, feeling helpless. Steele took no notice of him for the moment. "Then if it's not the money, I don't know what the motive can be." He turned to Ware. "See here, sir. This Wilson, whomsoever he may be, lived with the mother of Asher's office boy. He was her lodger. The boy told him about the money coming to Miss Kent. Afterwards the lad had a summons given him to serve on Morley. Wilson offered to take it, and did so. He removed his effects from Mrs. Benker's house. She's the mother of the lad, and went down to Rickwell. You know what happened there. Now if he didn't kill Miss Kent on account of the money, why did he ask the office boy about the matter?" Giles shook his head. "I can't say," he said, "no more than I can explain why Miss Denham helped him to escape." "Well," Steele scratched his chin, "I have an idea about that. But you must not be offended if I speak plainly, Mr. Ware." "I shall be offended if you speak evil of my friend, Miss Denham." This was from the Princess, who raised herself up with her eyes flashing angrily. "I will not have it," she said. "Then am I to say nothing?" asked Steele ironically. "Nothing against Miss Denham," put in Giles. "You are both rather difficult to deal with," remarked Steele with a shrug. "However, I'll explain, and you can draw your own inferences. It seems from what Mrs. Benker said that Mr. Wilson was mostly out all night and in all day. Also, he was frequently absent for a long time. He likewise took much interest in society newspapers and in the movements of the aristocracy. He also wore on his chain an ornament, a red enamelled cross, in fact." "What?" cried Giles with a start, and he noted that the Princess startled likewise, and that her face grew pale. "He wore a red enamelled cross," repeated Steele imperturbably, "on his watch chain. Mrs. Benker had been in the service of the late Lady Summersdale when the diamonds of that lady were stolen. She remembered that a red enamelled cross had been found in the safe whence the jewels were taken. Wilson was amused at this. He said that the cross was the emblem of a charitable society from which he received a weekly sum. Well," he hesitated and looked at his listeners, "that clue came to an end. I lost sight of Wilson. I then went to look for the red cross, the yacht, I mean." "What has the yacht to do with Wilson?" asked Ware angrily. "If you remember, sir, I told you that Wilson was the man who served the summons on Mr. Morley, and who, as I believed, killed Miss Kent. He afterwards fled with Miss Denham and went on board the yacht. Is not that the case, sir?" "So far as I can judge, it is," muttered Giles reluctantly. "Well, then," went on Steele triumphantly, while the Princess, as Giles observed, listened intently, "I looked after that yacht. I could not find her, but I am looking for her now. That is why I am in the country. I came up this morning from Deal, and I go back there to morrow." I find, sir, that this yacht puts in at various places every now and then." "Most yachts do." "Yes, sir. But while most yachts are at anchor in a place, does a burglary invariably occur?" "No, sir. Wait." For Giles had sprung to his feet. "Lady Summersdale's place was on the seashore. Her diamonds were stolen. At the time this yacht was at anchor in the bay. A red cross was found in the safe. The boat is called by that name. Several times I find that when the yacht has been at a certain place a burglary has occurred. This man Wilson wears a red cross on his watch chain. Now, sir, I believe that he is one of a gang of burglars, that the cross is a sign. This explains his interest in the society papers. He wants to find out where the best swag is to be found, and—" "But what has all this to do with my friend Anne?" cried the Princess. Steele shrugged his shoulders. "I say nothing," he replied. "You can draw your own inferences." "Do you mean to say that Miss Denham—" "I say nothing," interrupted Steele, catching up his hat. "Mr. Ware, I am at your service when you want me. Princess?" He bowed and went out. As the outer door closed, Giles and his hostess looked at one another. "The man's a foul liar," burst out Giles furiously. "Yes." The woman was very pale. "Still, my friend Anne once told me—" "Told you what?" "What I will tell you if you come again," she said under her breath, and suddenly left the room. She did not return. End of Chapter 11. Read by Céline Major.